Hi everybody, and here's a departure from the norm today. This is not hard-ass reviews, this is a hard-ass discussion today, and we are talking about Europe, in or out. Now on the 24th, I believe, there will be a referendum in the UK, where I am based, on whether we keep closer ties with Europe or whether we break away from Europe. And it is a really contentious discussion because it's not a party decision. So in other words, you've got the Conservatives on one side and then you've got Labour on the other side. And it's not a case of the Conservatives are voting to stay in, want us to stay in, and Labour want us to stay out. There are members of the Labour Party who cross either side and members of the Conservative Party who also cross either side. And that makes it more difficult because I'm a member of the Labour Party, and usually in such discussions and arguments and votes you vote with your party generally. You generally vote with your party. But in this case, the Prime Minister David Cameron wants to stay in Europe. But then you have another high-profile Conservative, Boris Johnson, who wants to be out of Europe, along with Ian Duncan Smith, who Ian Duncan Smith was leader of the Conservative Party. I think Duncan Smith was leader for a very short time, around 2000, 2001, before William Hague took over after him, I think. And they are all Eurosceptics. Those Conservatives that I mentioned are all Eurosceptics. They wish to have no ties with Europe at all. And that goes back probably for all of their political life. And David Cameron at his heart is also a Eurosceptic. Now that causes problems for me in this discussion, because I am being told, it's like I'm being advised by my Prime Minister, who at his heart is a Eurosceptic, to stay in Europe. And I'm thinking, well, you're telling me that when really, in your heart, you wish to have nothing to do with Europe, or you don't want to be in with Europe. We don't have the single European currency in this country. We still have the pound. And there are many decisions in Europe, you know, or many things that happen in Europe that don't apply to Britain. Now, there are many policies, a lot of policies that happen, you know, through the European Parliament and in Europe that a lot of Brits, you know, disagree with. Immigration is one. You have the main discussion topics are immigration, homeland security. There's been a lot of talk of the NHS and more money going to the NHS if we come out. And then this morning I read an article about David Cameron saying that if we come out, the NHS, there will be less money going to the NHS. So it's like, how do you make your decision if people are just throwing out negatives on either side? So if we stay in Europe, the NHS will be worse. If we come out of Europe, the NHS will be worse. If we stay in Europe, immigration will be rife and we won't be able to control our borders. If we come out of Europe, we won't be able to control our borders either. So you've got people throwing negatives off either side. Now there are Labour politicians. I mean, the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, he at his heart is also a Eurosceptic, yet he is standing alongside David Cameron for the In campaign. Now the other day I had a real problem because on the news there was a clip of David Cameron and Tony Blair standing alongside one another. Now those two gentlemen couldn't be poles apart. You know, they are absolutely poles apart. Tony Blair, Labour Prime Minister, David Cameron, Conservative Prime Minister. And they couldn't want to be further apart in their politics, yet both of them are standing shoulder to shoulder saying, let's stay in Europe. Now, you can believe that Tony Blair believes that because he's always been a pro-European, Tony Blair. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to have, as a Labour voter and as a Labour Party member, I'm not going to have David Cameron telling me to stay in Europe when at his heart he is a Eurosceptic. He wants to come out of Europe. So it's that odd decision to say, well, if I vote to stay in, I'm voting to stay in under a Conservative government and under a Conservative Prime Minister who really doesn't have a huge amount of love for Europe. And very little love for the European Parliament, yet I'm supposed to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. And it sticks in my gut, to be honest, to make it easy for David Cameron. Now you could say, oh well, Geoff, you're standing alongside Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan Smith and John Redwood, very prominent Conservatives who were for the No campaign. They want to come out. And they say, oh, well, you're standing alongside them. Well, they're not the Prime Minister. They're not the Prime Minister. Cameron is the Prime Minister, and there is something distasteful, I feel, about standing alongside him. Now, I've always been a pro-European. I voted first in 1987, and I've always been a pro-European. But my main issue is homeland security. I want better homeland security, and I believe that homeland security would be better addressed being outside Europe, being able to control our borders without any European intervention. There have been terrible atrocities, as we all know, over the last year or so in France and Belgium, and we've had terrible atrocities in Britain over the last decade or more, with the bombings in London. Terrible atrocities. Now, those terrorists who did the bombings in London, I think they held British passports. But moving around, I don't like the idea of individuals being able to acquire European passports and to be able to slip in and out, whether they're slipping from France to Belgium, and they'd be able to move around Europe unchecked and move into Britain unchecked. I don't like the idea of that. I don't like the idea of that at all, and I am a pro-European. My parents are from Jamaica, and the same outrageous and racist arguments that are levelled at, in terms of immigration, of us being flooded by Eastern European immigrants and people coming in and taking our jobs, they were the same arguments levelled at West Indian families who came in the 50s and the 60s, to try and find a better life, post-war. And they were asked to come here, and they were still treated like shit, and still given the shittiest properties, and still treated as if they weren't welcome, and they were coming in and taking jobs from everybody. And those same arguments are being levelled at people who come here now. So I don't want any part of that. I've always been a pro-European, and I think if you want to come to a country, that's whether it's me wanting to move and live in Jamaica or me wanting to move and live in America. If you want to move to a country for a better life for your family, you should be allowed to do so, and you certainly should be allowed to be assisted, in a moral and Christian way in order to achieve what you want to achieve by moving to another country. But I do feel that homeland security would be suited by staying out. A fortnight ago I was an in, very pro-European, and I was an in, but listening to the arguments, homeland security stands head and shoulders for me. And I think we would be better suited staying out. So I am with the Labour voters and the Labour members who wish to stay outside Europe. And for me, I would prefer not to stand alongside a Eurosceptic Prime Minister. Because every single time that we have a Tory leader, they spend most of their time bashing Europe. They spend most of the time going and discussing, they travel to Europe to discuss things with the German Chancellor and other leaders of Europe, and then they spend most of their time trying to veto and stay out of most of the things that want to be brought in by the European Parliament. We don't have the European currency in this country. We don't have that. And at the moment, Britain is well served, in Europe. We don't have close ties with Europe now. We don't have close ties with Europe, and we don't have to adhere to a lot of the politics that, more of the mainland European countries have to adhere to. We don't have to do that. So, would it be that terrible to break from Europe? Would it be that terrible? I don't think so in the way of Homeland Security. In the way of Homeland Security, I don't think it would. Now, I can't say whether the NHS would be better, because even if the No campaign gets its way and we break away from Europe, we still will have a Conservative government. So I don't think there'll be any changes there. So I don't subscribe to the nonsense of the NHS will be better if we stay out, because if we stay out, we will still have a Conservative government. So I'm not with that. But I do think, and I do believe now, that we would be better served staying out. Now, what do you think? Leave your comments below. Even if you're not from Britain, what are your opinions on Homeland Security in relation to your country? It's going to be, the decision will be in about 10 days' time, so it's about 10 days' time that we will vote. And it is a game changer. I do believe people should vote on this issue. If you haven't managed to get your voting registration yet, you should. I think the time's up on getting your registration. So if you don't have your registration, then it's hard cheese, I suppose. But I do think this is an issue where we should all pay attention, and we should all be looking to vote on this issue. Well, anyway, we'll be back to movies the next time, but I thought I would have to do a video to talk on this issue, so leave your comments below, likes, and subscribe, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Take it easy, everybody. Bye for now.